I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. The White House announces names of the Gaza Board of Peace under Donald Trump's plan. Ukrainian negotiators head to the United States for security guarantees talks. And President Trump threatens new tariffs on countries opposed to the Greenland takeover. The White House has unveiled a new international body to oversee Gaza's temporary governance as President Donald Trump moves his US-backed peace plan to its second phase.
The White House says the United States has named members of a board of peace to oversee Gaza's temporary governance under President Donald Trump's plan. Officials say the move launches phase 2 of a 20-point roadmap focused on stabilization, reconstruction and longer-term governance following a fragile ceasefire. The plan also establishes a Palestinian technocratic body, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, to manage day-to-day governance and restore public services. President Trump will chair the Board of Peace. The founding executive board includes US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, US Envoy Steve Witkoff, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, Apollo Global Management's Mark Rowan, World Bank President Ajay Banga and US advisor Robert Gabriel. The White House says former UN Middle East envoy Nikolay Mladenov will serve as High Representative for Gaza, coordinating on the ground with the Palestinian Committee. An international stabilization force will be deployed to support security and demilitarization efforts, led by US Major General Jasper Jeffers. A separate Gaza executive board is also being formed, including representatives from the United States, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates and the United Nations, with additional members to be announced.
US President Donald Trump on Friday offered to mediate the long-running Nile River water dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia. He made the offer in a letter to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Trump said the United States is ready to help ensure fair water sharing while allowing Ethiopia to generate electricity from its $5 billion Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The dispute centres on Ethiopia's Blue Nile Dam, which Egypt says could cut its water supply, while Ethiopia sees it as vital for growth and doubling electricity production. Ukraine says senior officials are heading to Washington for key talks with the United States as Kyiv seeks progress on security guarantees amid renewed Russian threats and a worsening energy crisis.
Ukraine says senior officials are travelling to the United States for talks on security guarantees and a post-war recovery framework. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv is seeking clarity on next steps and Russia's response to US-backed diplomatic efforts.
We hope that there will be more clarity regarding the documents that we have already prepared with the American side, as well as Russia's response to all the diplomatic work that has taken place and is still ongoing.
Zelensky says Ukraine has completed its part of the work, with a possible signing expected in Davos if the documents are approved.
If everything is finalized, if there is acceptance from the American side, because from our side, in principle, I believe that we are finished, and then it will be possible to sign during Davos.
He also warned that Ukraine faces growing security risks as intelligence points to new large-scale Russian attacks, while air defense supplies remain insufficient. At the same time, Ukraine is facing its most severe energy crisis since the start of the war, following repeated Russian strikes and extreme winter conditions. Electricity remains limited, with supplies prioritized for essential services.
There was no such difficult situation in Kyiv since the beginning of the war. The last attack was very significant and painful for our city because half of the houses, high-rise buildings in our city, which is about 6,000, were disconnected from the heat supply when it is -20 outside at night. At the moment, there are about 100 buildings without heating. That is, almost all 6,000 buildings have heating now.
Ukraine has declared an energy emergency. Energy Minister Denis Shmyhal says all power plants in the country have been damaged by Russian strikes. He says Russia carried out 612 targeted attacks on Ukraine's energy grid in 2025, knocking out thousands of megawatts of capacity.
International tensions are rising over Greenland after President Donald Trump suggested the United States could use tariffs to pressure countries into supporting its claim to the Arctic island. European allies warn the move could deepen divisions within NATO.
US President Donald Trump has warned he may impose tariffs on countries that refuse to back his plan for the United States to control Greenland, further straining ties with European allies. Speaking at a White House healthcare event, Trump said Greenland was vital to US national security and suggested trade penalties could be used as leverage without naming specific countries.
And I may do that for Greenland too. I may put a tariff on countries if they don't go along with Greenland, because we need Greenland for national security.
Greenland, a self-governing territory of Denmark, has repeatedly rejected any idea of being sold or transferred to the United States. Denmark has also firmly opposed Trump's claims, warning that any military action would undermine NATO unity. Trump argues Greenland's strategic Arctic location and mineral resources make it critical for missile defense and for monitoring Russian and Chinese activity. The US already operates a military base on the island. Amid rising tensions, a bipartisan US congressional delegation visited Denmark and Greenland to show support and lower the temperature. Senator Chris Coons said the group aimed to listen to local leaders and relay their views to Washington.
Listen respectfully.
Several European NATO members, including France, Germany and the UK, have also sent small military teams to Greenland to participate in joint exercises with Denmark. Russia, meanwhile, said Greenland remains Danish territory and described the situation as extraordinary under international law. Despite growing international opposition, Trump has not ruled out further steps, saying talks with NATO over Greenland are continuing.
And in news from the Balkans, Bulgaria is heading for another snap election after President Rumen Radev confirmed no party was able to form a government. The Alliance for Rights and Freedoms returned the final exploratory mandate unfulfilled, the third refusal this week. With Parliament unable to produce a stable majority, Radev said he will appoint a caretaker cabinet and call early elections, the 8th in Bulgaria in the past 4 years. Portugal is facing an uncertain outcome in this Sunday's presidential vote, with no clear favourite emerging among the top candidates. Recent polls show a tight race and suggest the contest is likely to go to a runoff for the first time in 40 years.
Portuguese voters will head to the polling stations on Sunday, knowing the presidential election will likely end up in a rare runoff, the first in 40 years. It comes as political fragmentation leaves the race wide open. A recent poll shows far-right candidate André Ventura, leader of the opposition party Chega, slightly ahead with 24% of voting intentions. He's closely followed by socialist Antonio José Seguro on 23%, while João Coutrinho de Figueiredo of the Liberal Initiative is close behind within the poll's 2.2% margin of error. Two other candidates, including Social Democratic Party-backed Luis Marques Mendes, each have 14%, keeping the contest among the top five extremely close. Smaller polls in recent days have shown similar tight margins, highlighting the uncertainty of the outcome.
The days ahead will be really challenging, and the result is unexpected. What is certainly expected is that we will have to go to a second round.
The Portuguese presidency, while largely ceremonial, carries important powers, including the ability to dissolve parliament and call snap elections. Despite Ventura's lead, his rejection rate of more than 60% suggests he would lose in a runoff against any of the other top contenders, leaving the final result uncertain.
Greek rice farmers are warning the new EU trade deal could threaten their livelihoods. The agreement would allow more duty-free rice into Europe, adding pressure to growers already hit by rising costs and drought. The country says the deal will boost exports and includes protections for farmers, but Greek farmers disagree.
Rice farmers in Greece have voiced concern over the new EU-Mercosur agreement, fearing it could threaten their livelihoods. The deal, due to be signed on Saturday, will allow Europe to import 60,000 tons of duty-free rice from South American rice over 5 years. Greece, Europe's third-largest rice producer, exports most of its 240,000-ton annual crop to Europe and Turkey. Farmers say rising production costs and recent droughts have already made life difficult and have blockaded roads over delayed EU aid.
The prices at which we used to cultivate no longer exist. A year ago we were selling rice at 50 cents. Today it is 25, without products from Mercosur having even arrived yet, without tariffs, because some products were coming in, but there were duties. Today, if those also arrive without tariffs, we cannot even think about cultivating.
We will not manage to survive. At this moment, as we speak, many colleagues have already abandoned their fields. Whether they are theirs or rented, they have left their machinery and have sought other jobs in the private sector.
However, Greece says the deal will help sell products like feta cheese and mastic, while also protecting farmers against sudden import spikes.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney departed Beijing on Saturday after a landmark visit that produced a trade deal with China. The visit was the first by a Canadian Prime Minister since 2017 and aimed to reset ties with China, Canada's second-largest trading partner. Under the agreement, Canada will cut tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% to 6.1% under a quota system, while China will lower levies on Canadian canola from 85% to 15% by March the 1st. The agreement is seen as a breakthrough and a step toward diversifying Canadian trade beyond the United States. South Korea's impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol will be jailed for 5 years over abuse of power, obstructing justice and falsifying documents in relation to his failed martial law bid in 2024. This is the first of the verdicts in 4 trials linked to his shock martial law decree.
Opinions are divided in South Koreans after a court sentenced former President Yoon Suk-yeol to 5 years in prison over an unsuccessful bid to impose martial law in December 2024. The Seoul Central District Court found Yoon guilty of using the Presidential Security Service to stop investigators from arresting him at his home. This is considered the first ruling in several cases against the former president. Some residents showed disappointment at the sentencing.
Overall, when I look at President Yoon's actions, I honestly think that emotionally, for me, the sentence was a bit too lenient.
While others questioned whether due process was properly followed in his case,
when ordinary people look at this, they wonder, how could there even be talk of an insurrection in a presidential system? It was wrong from the start, and the order to arrest Yoon itself was wrong. What I mean is, if you want to apprehend a president, you must follow legal procedures, but those procedures weren't followed.
The case has sparked a wider debate across the country over leadership, accountability, and the rule of law.
NASA said Friday that Artemis 2, the first crewed mission to the moon since the Apollo era, is moving closer to launch as the agency prepares to roll out its rocket and spacecraft. The 10-day mission will take astronauts farther from Earth than ever, testing spacecraft systems and life support while flying around the far side of the moon. NASA officials said the rollout of the fully stacked Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft is scheduled to begin early Saturday. Artemis 2 is part of the US plan to return humans to the moon by 2028 and will help scientists study how both spacecraft and crew perform in deep space.
One is completely silent.
Now let's take a look at major stories from the region. While Russia continues its full-scale war in Ukraine, a major sanctions evasion network is helping it acquire critical Western technology. An exclusive A News investigative documentary, Shadow Trade, reveals how Armenia has become a central hub in the scheme.
Despite sweeping Western sanctions, Russia's military machine continues to receive a flood of vital foreign components. Exclusive A News investigation reveals a key route through Armenia. Data shows Armenian exports to Russia exploded from $880 million before the war to nearly $3 billion now. The spike is in specific critical categories: phones, computers, machinery and microchips, exactly what Russia needs for its weapons.
A lot of countries cannot export directly to Russia because of sanctions. So imagine the trucks that have a lot of electronics, a lot of phones come to Armenia. Some trucks from Russia, some trucks from other countries. And the goods from other countries on the spot are hauled from one truck to the other on the spot. And those go to Russia. And the paperwork is such that those products were produced in Armenia. But this is the case. So this is in fact re-exports. So the paperwork says that those products were produced in Armenia, so to circumvent the sanctions.
Experts say Armenia's small economy could never absorb or produce such a volume, confirming it's a transit point.
Seeing that kind of data, seeing that evolution of demand in those countries, that evolution of their trade with the European Union, we can say for sure that not the story about the development of their economies and their industries, that's the story about the re-export of goods via their territories to the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian forensic teams dismantle Russian missiles and drones daily, finding them full of these Western microchips. They confirm the components are essential for Russia's attacks.
So in general, we have identified about 600 components, different components in different types of weapons. I'm sure that if these chips will not provide it to Russia, they will not be able to use missiles and drones.
In return, Armenia receives billions in sanctioned Russian gold.
According to the Armenian Customs Service, the country sharply increased its gold imports in 2023, and in the first half of 2024, it reached $4.4 billion, about 66 tons. And there are companies which are backed by Armenian oligarchs and politicians who are part of this entire scheme, which also raises legitimate questions whether the Armenian government is aware or somehow protects this entire business.
To move this volume, investigators track the operation to Yerevan's Zvartnots airport, where cargo traffic doubled. The gold is then re-exported to markets like the UAE, creating a secret financial channel for Moscow. While Armenia's Prime Minister speaks of European aspirations, the investigation finds the country deeply enmeshed in Russia's sanction-busting network, a network with deadly consequences on the Ukrainian front.
Georgia's ruling party has filed a complaint with the BBC over a report that suggested that Georgian authorities used toxic chemical compounds to disperse protests in late 2024. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has more.
The ruling party, Georgian Dream, has officially filed a complaint against the BBC, accusing the British public broadcaster of disseminating false, unverified and defamatory allegations against the Georgian government. The announcement was made by Speaker of Parliament, Shalva Papuashvili. According to Papuashvili, the complaint demands a public apology from the BBC and the removal of a film and related materials that alleged Georgian law enforcement used a World War I-era chemical weapon during protests. The ruling party categorically denies the claims, calling them fabricated and politically driven. The complaint is grounded in the BBC's own editorial principles. The UK's Ofcom Broadcasting Code and European Court of Human Rights COS law, which obliges journalists to meet the highest standards of accuracy and fairness when making serious allegations. Georgian Dream argues that the BBC failed on multiple fronts: accuracy, impartiality, and the right of reply while presenting assumptions as established facts. Papuashvili stated that if the BBC does not correct the alleged violations internally, the case will move to Ofcom and potentially to UK courts, with the option of appealing to the European Court of Human Rights. The controversy has reignited political confrontation inside Georgia. Opposition figures dismissed the complaint as a distraction tactic, insisting that an international investigation, not legal pressure on media, is needed to determine what caused the alleged chemical poisoning during the December protests. Internationally, the BBC's initial reporting had already drawn attention from foreign officials and rights groups, amplifying scrutiny of Georgia's protest response and fueling broader geopolitical narratives. Georgian Dream, however, claims that those reactions were based on a predetermined false narrative. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
US President Donald Trump on Friday thanked Iran's leadership and said he greatly respected their reported decision to cancel more than 800 scheduled hangings of protesters. Trump has strongly supported the demonstrations, which began on the 28th of December over economic hardship and currency collapse, though local media reported some clerics still called for executions. He also said he alone decided against military action in response to the protests.
Yesterday scheduled over 800 hangings. They didn't hang anyone, they canceled the hangings. That had a big impact.
Iran has been uninvited from the Munich Security Conference, a rare and sharp diplomatic move that underscores Tehran's growing international isolation amid ongoing unrest. And at the same time, opposition figure Reza Pahlavi has promised free elections if he were to return to power, raising questions about leadership legitimacy and what comes next for Iran. Let's bring in our guest, Mohammad Shakil Ahmad, Chief Executive of Global Strategic Institute for Sustainable Development from Islamabad, Pakistan. Mohammad, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, Iran's exclusion from the Munich Security Conference is very symbolic. How damaging is this kind of diplomatic isolation for Tehran, and does it change anything in practice?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very, the critical situation in Iran, and the Munich conference meeting regarding the invitation to the Iranian foreign minister. Laterally, they decided not to invite the Iranian officials in that very meeting. I think this is a very strange decision, and so far Iran have a government, they have their own foreign minister, and if the international security collaborators need security around the world, they must invite Iranian officials in that very conference. Because you can see that this is a club to maintain the security and to discuss the proposals and the dialogues for international security at this highest and the prestigious forum. And I think Iran at this critical juncture have in a position to participate in this conference and to decide the security in the region. So I think the Munich conference and the organizers of the Munich conference must ensure to get invitation to the Iranian officials in that very conference, but unluckily they refused to invite Iranian officials over there, and I think this will destabilize the international security environment in future.
Okay, having said that, Mohammed, is this decision aimed at pressuring Iran's leadership, or is it more about signalling where the international community now draws the line, if you consider the lack of security in Iran at the moment for its people?
Yeah, we know that the situation in Iran is under stress nowadays, and the global security needs leaders around the world, and Iran is a key stakeholders of the international security mechanism, and the invitation to this conference is, I think, this invitation to this conference is symbolic, because it seems like a pressure to put pressure on Iran regarding protest in Iran, because the protest in Iran is primarily against the price hikes, against the inflation, and so on. And I think international security needs participation of Iran in the greater debate on security issues in the region, because Iran is a key player of the security arrangement in this region, that is in Middle East and the Central Asia.
Okay, Mohammed, one last question. Reza Pahlavi says he would hold elections if he returned to power. How credible is that promise, and how much political weight does he actually carry inside Iran, not just among the diaspora?
So elections always depends upon the local people. It's basically primarily a representation of the local people in the decision-making circles. Election doesn't mean to come out from outside of the world and to place their own agenda inside the local population, because in democratic principles, elections, you can see the key fundamental component in a democratic process, and Reza Shah Pahlavi's statement that if he came back, he will hold elections in Iran. This is symbolically a good decision, but it always depends on the people of Iran to hold elections itself, because it is the political choice of the indigenous people. Voters will decide, and the people will decide what will be the future of their own country. Imposing any foreign, the component, any foreign figures on Iran, this is against the basic principles of democracy and the electoral affairs. So it all depends upon the people of Iran. They know much better about their own territorial integrity. They know much better about their own political participation and electoral participation. Give them the freedom to the people, not imposing any other ideas from outside of the world on the local people in Iran. If there is any outsider come into power in Iran, then it might destabilize the region in future.
Mohammed, thank you so much for joining the program. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Kazakhstan is adjusting its oil export routes amid ongoing disruptions to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. The changes follow a series of attacks and operational restrictions that have raised concerns over supply security and budgetary risks. Our correspondent reports.
Kazakhstan is redirecting its oil exports amid ongoing restrictions on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, the key route that carries up to 80% of the country's crude exports. In late December, around 300,000 tons of oil were redirected via alternative routes through the Castrans-Oil system. Supplies were sent to Germany, China, along the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan corridor, and through the Russian ports of Novorossiysk and Ust-Luga. Kazakhstan's national oil company says these measures will continue into January 2026 as long as restrictions remain in place. At the same time, Kazakhstan is increasing deliveries to Europe. In 2025, exports to Germany reached 2.1 million tons, while with the volumes expected to rise to 2.5 million tons next year. Oil shipments to China remain stable, totaling 1.1 million tons last year. Tensions escalated after an attack on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium on November 29th last year. Kazakhstan's foreign ministry described the incident as an act of aggression and lodged an official protest. In mid-December, the energy minister confirmed the losses of 480,000 tons, but said the annual production and export targets would still be met. In January this year, the situation worsened. Drones targeted two tankers preparing to load Kazakh oil, causing damage while the vessels were awaiting loading. And according to experts, continued attacks along this route could lead to significant financial losses for the state budget. They argue that the current situation calls not for temporary measures or emergency fixes, but for a systematic long-term diversification strategy. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.